So, how do you try to change people without them taking offense? That is what today's topic is all about. We're diving into part 4, how to win friends and influence people. This is the final part of this book. Super pumped to be here. Julie, what is going on? Good morning. Good morning. If you're not a part of our business leadership book club, it's completely free. Dive into the description below so you can be a part of this. But today we're diving into part 4, which is what he terms as how to be a leader, how to change people without giving offense or arousing resentment. Now, this book freaking is incredible. I mean, I'm considering how long ago it was written. These things are definitely timeless. And we're going to go into the final, is it 8? 9, final 9 principles of this book. Just as an FYI, we have picked out our next book. It is The Power of One More by Ed Milet. We are actually going to start reading that. Some people have already started reading it. I'm going to start reading it next week on Monday. Now, that being said, for everybody who's in our book club, we typically meet on the first and third Thursday of every month. This month, we are not meeting again. We're going to meet following in January. In November, we're going to meet the first Thursday of the month in then. I'm out of town. I'm going to a leadership summit for fathers. I've been asked to go there. And so I'm going to be out of town, so I'm not going to be able to do our next call. So you will not see us live here on Thursday for at least the next 3 weeks. But I will be inside the app. As a part of this, you become a free member of the app, where I'm going to be sharing some takeaways and hearing from you guys, doing some of the stuff we typically do on the live calls during the actual or inside of the actual app. Okay, so let's dive in and get started today. This one's probably going to be pretty quick, but I also do want to hear your takeaways. I know we have incredible leaders who are on this team. Julie is one of them. I want to hear feedback from you guys, and especially like if any of these like really connect with you. Okay, all right. So number 1, this is part 4. Chapter number 1 of part 4 is if you must find fault, this is the way to begin. So in the beginning, he's kind of like telling this story about like if you have some bad news or constructive criticism to give someone, the most easiest way to listen to unpleasant things is after we have first heard some praise about our good points. Now, this chapter, he dives a little bit deep into some different stories. And basically, he says, beginning with praise is like the dentist who begins his work with Novocaine. The patient still gets the drilling, but the Novocaine is pain-killing. And if that's the case, then a leader should use principle number 1, which is begin with praise and honest appreciation. I've always found this to be true. And what's weird is I put up a poll on social media this last week. I'm like, do you want to hear the bad news or the good news first? By the way, I want you guys to answer this. What do you like to hear? Do you like to hear the bad news first or the good news? For me personally, I like the bad news. I want to hear about all the bad stuff so that I can flip it around when I hear about the good news, right? But it's kind of weird because in this situation, if somebody's going to give me some, like, let's say, criticism or something that I can improve, I really do like them to lead with some of the things I did really well, right? You get done a presentation, the first thing you don't want to hear is, you know what, you sucked at all these things. Oh, and then you were kind of good over here, right? For me personally, doing like live calls or doing things in front of an audience, I always love when they're like, hey, these things, so powerful, definitely keep doing them. And here's some things we can do over here. And I think you can make it even better. I always am more open to accepting that. The same goes when it comes to relationships, when it comes to even talking to my daughter about like doing some stuff on her like schoolwork that wasn't up to that certain level, right? That she wants it to be. It's always leading with all the things that she's amazing at, because there's always going to be those things. It's just whether or not we decide to focus on them. So that's why if you want to win people or help change people without giving offense, you always start with beginning with praise and honest appreciation. Okay, number 2, Danielle says bad news first. Definitely the positives with criticism first, however. I know, isn't that weird, Danielle? How it's kind of like in reverse. But I always love to remind myself that this is the case. Thank goodness I have this book, especially when it comes to giving praise to people before I start talking about some things that we can change or we can update. Okay. Number 2 is how to criticize and not be hated for it. I'm going to tell you a little story, or I'm going to read this little story. This is a powerful one in the intro of this chapter. It's how to criticize and not be hated for it. He says, Charles Schwab was passing through one of his steel mills one day at noon when he came across some of his employees smoking. Immediately above their heads was a sign that said, no smoking. Did Schwab point out the sign and say, can't you read? Oh, no, he did not. He walked over to the men, handed each one a cigar, and said, I'll appreciate it, boys, if you smoke all these on the outside. They knew that he knew that they had broken a rule. And they admired him because he said nothing about it and gave them a little present and made them feel important. couldn't keep from loving a man like that, could you? And that's why number 2 here is, he says, many people begin with criticism, their criticism with sincere praise followed by the word but and ending with a critical statement. For example, in trying to change a child's careless attitude towards studies, we might say, we're really proud of you, Johnny, for raising your grades in this term. But if you had worked harder on your algebra, the results would make this not even better. He said, we could easily just change this by changing the word but to and. So we're really proud of you, Johnny, for raising your grades in this term. And by continuing the same conscientious efforts, next term, your algebra grade will be just like the others. So instead of calling attention to one's mistakes directly, calling attention to one mistake indirectly works wonders with sensitive people who may resent bitterly any direct criticism. Which is why an effective way to correct another person's mistake is to call attention to the people's mistakes indirectly. I really like that idea too. It's, you have to get a little bit creative about how you call out to it. But even like that difference by changing the word but to and. This is something that I've literally used in my personal life, in writing emails, in writing posts for social media, is anytime I either say out loud the word but, or I'm thinking about it, or I'm writing it, I stop. Because there's so many times when I use the word but that literally what it does is it eliminates everything that I just said, right? So it's like, I want to be healthy, but I just don't have the time because I have kids, right? And so that first part just completely disappeared. It was like, why even say that, right? And instead, I'm like, okay, Mark, can I reframe this into an and or a but? And yes, I'm kind of talking to myself right now, but I kind of talk to myself a lot, like 50,000 thoughts a day, right? And so as I'm writing that, I'm like, okay, I don't like the word but here. Let's switch it to an and. And it just totally brings an entirely different feeling and energy to the situation. And it's the same thing you can do when you're calling attention to people's mistakes. All right, number 3. Actually, Julie says, that was great. Gave them an incentive with a message to accomplish the goal. Yep, exactly, Julie. All right, number 3 is talk about your own mistakes first. I feel like this is something that I do naturally. Maybe I do it a little bit too much, where I do call out to my mistakes so that people can kind of feel like, hey, we're all making mistakes, including me. But he has a really nice story here. He says, my niece, Josephine Carnegie, had come to New York to be my secretary. She was 19, had graduated from high school 3 years previously, and her business experience was a trifle more than 0. She became one of the most proficient secretaries west of Suez. But in the beginning, she was, susceptible to improvement. One day, when I started to criticize her, I said to myself, just a minute, Dale Carnegie, just a minute. You're twice as old as her. You've had tens of thousands of times as much business experience. How can you possibly expect her to have your own view, to have your own viewpoint, your judgment, your initiative, mediocre, though they may be? And just a minute, Dale, what were you doing at 19? Remember the asinine mistakes and blunders you made? Remember that the next time, remember that time that you did this and you did that? He said, after a minute, he thought about it. And he said, when I wanted to call Josephine's attention to a mistake, I used to begin by saying, you have made a mistake, Josephine, but the Lord knows it's worse than many that I have personally made. And so number 3 is talk about your own mistakes before criticizing other people. It's crazy. It's like all of these. And by the way, I don't know what is in my throat right now. I got a frog in my throat. It's crazy. All of these really start about not just immediately reacting or responding to something, but instead taking a second to really think about it, right? So principle 1, begin with praise and honest appreciation. You got to stop and think about what do I appreciate about this person or the job they're doing right now before I make some criticism or before I talk to them about how they can improve. Principle 2 is call attention to the person's mistake indirectly. So instead of immediately reacting, thinking about it, how can I call out to this indirectly? And then principle 3 is talk about your mistakes before criticizing the other person. I can't tell you how many times I've used this, and it really helps diffuse the situation, because it's no longer about me attacking them. It's all about our growth together, right? And when I think about our growth together, and it makes us feel like it's not me versus them, it's us, right? And I really like the feel of that. So really calling out to your specific mistakes. And I can always find mistakes, no matter what situation. I always can either come up with mistakes that I've done in the past, in right now. I mean, so many different ways, but calling out to it, especially with my kids, I feel makes a really great connection, because it gets them to see everybody makes mistakes, right? All right. Number 4, no one likes to take orders. Here's another story he said. There's a man who declared that during all the time he had never heard Owen D. Young give a direct order to anyone. He always gave suggestions, not orders. Owen D. Young never said, for example, do that or do this, or don't do this or don't do that. He would say, you might consider this, or do you think that would work? Frequently, he would say, after he had dictated a letter, what do you think of this? In looking over a letter of one of his assistants, he would say, maybe if we were to phrase it this way, it would be better. He always gave people the opportunity to do things themselves. He never told his assistants to do things. He let them do them. Let them learn from their mistakes. I really like that idea too. So principle number 4 is ask questions instead of giving direct orders. Even thinking about it that way, like out loud, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? It's crazy because you're literally asking for their opinion, and whatever their decision is, where they're like, I really do think that is a good idea. Now it's going to have a different level of buy-in rather than saying, hey, you made this mistake. Instead, you can actually give them some ideas, ask them some questions, and help them come to the conclusion, which oftentimes is in the exact alignment with what you want. But now it's actually, they have their buy-in, which means they're more likely to take action and be consistent with that. Principle number 4, ask questions instead of giving direct orders. I know all my life coaches out there, a lot of you guys are life coaches. You guys all know how much power that has when you're able to ask questions rather than give responses. All right. Number 5, each one of these chapters is like super short. Number 5 is let the other person save face. Years ago, the electric company was faced with the delicate task of removing Charles Steinmetz from the head of the department. Steinmetz, a genius of the first magnitude when it came to electricity, was a failure at the head of the calculating department. Yet the company didn't dare offend the man. He was indispensable and highly sensitive. So they gave him a new title. They made him consulting engineer of the General Electric Company, a new title for work he was already doing, and let someone else head up the department. He was happy. So were the officers of GE. They had greatly maneuvered their most temperamental star, and they had done it without a storm by letting him save face. That's why. Principle number 5, they say, even if we are right and the other person is definitely wrong, we only destroy ego by causing someone to lose face. The legendary French aviation pioneer and author Antoine de Saint-Exupéry wrote, I have no right to say or do anything that diminishes a man in his own eyes. What matters is not what I think of him, but what he thinks of himself. Hurting a man in his dignity is a crime. And that's why a real leader will also always follow principle number 5. Let the other person save face. Man, such powerful points here. Any single one of these, I feel like if you lead with any one of these, every single one of these could potentially work out. And I'm sure there's like one or two maybe that that each of us lean into instead of of course, trying to do them all. But in reality, they're just so powerful. It's crazy when you see the different direction. It was crazy how old this book is, yet all of these things are timeless. All right, number 6, how to spur people on to success. He says, Pete Barlow was an old friend of mine. He had a dog at Pony Act and spent his life traveling with circuses and vaudeville shows. I love to watch Pete train new dogs for his act. I noticed that a moment a dog showed the slightest improvement, Pete patted and praised him and gave him meat and made a great to-do about it. That's nothing new. Animal trainers have been using the same technique for centuries. Why, I wonder, don't we use the same common sense trying to change people that we use when trying to change dogs? Why don't we use meat instead of a whip? Why don't we use praise instead of condemnation? Let us praise even the slightest improvement. That inspires the other person to keep improvement. There's this philosophy in life coaching that is like what gets recognized gets repeated. There we go. What gets recognized gets repeated. Principle number 6 is praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. So when it comes to really leaning into this and really thinking if I want something to be repeated, if I see any kind of improvement, calling out to it, acknowledging it and appreciating it is such a game changer. one of the things that I did is I put together a video recently that talks about like how to navigate difficult and tough conversations. I think it actually comes out today. It may come out today, guys. If you're part of the inner circle, you already probably have access to it. But it's really talking about like how to have very difficult conversations with people. And one of the things that I always make sure I do is thank the person for their willingness to have a difficult conversation, because not people would have been willing to do it. They didn't have to actually have this difficult conversation, but it shows me that they're serious, that they want to grow, that they want to like make this thing work. And when I do that, what I'm basically doing is I'm acknowledging and appreciating them for being willing to have a difficult conversation so that they continue to be open to have difficult conversations in the future, right? And when I acknowledge them and tell them how powerful of a person or a leader they are, yes, it feels good, even though it sucks to be having that difficult conversation with them. But it's such a game changer when you start to praise the things that people are doing that really they don't have to do, but they're willing to do it because it's important to them. And reminding them that you see that and that you appreciate for them, for that is a real game changer. All right, number 7. And by the way, I just saw Penelope, aka Anna Camarata, is a new member of Inner Circle. What's up? What's up, Anna? And Michael. Michael is a new member of the Inner Circle. By the way, if you guys have no idea what the Inner Circle is, it is a group of people who are a part of this channel who get some behind the scenes information from us, early releases of videos, and then a live Q&A just with me and Teresa once a month. It's a powerful, powerful group. If you ever want to learn about that, click the join button below our channel and you'll see. Okay. Channel number 7. Number 7 is give a dog a good name. Give a dog a good name. By the way, new puppy, his name is Rocket. And that's a good name because he's all over the place and he's like a piranha. Okay. It says, in short, if you want to improve a person in a certain respect, act as though that particular trait were already one of his or her outstanding characteristics. Shakespeare said, assume a virtue if you have it, if you have it not. And it might be well to assume and state openly that other people have the virtue you want them to develop. Give them a fine reputation to live up to, and they will make prodigious efforts rather than see you're disillusioned. So I feel like there was a really good story in this one. Okay, yes. So one of the mechanics in this story, was he was really, really good at like fixing cars and he was really taking his job seriously. And over time, it started to diminish less. And so when they had a conversation with him, they could have been like, you know what, you suck at this now. Like, why are you doing this? You need to improve or you're going to be removed. But instead what they did is they called out to his higher self. Like, hey, before you were a really fine mechanic, you've been in this line of work for a good number of years. You repaired many vehicles to the customer satisfaction. In fact, we had a number of compliments about the good work that you have done. Yet, as of late, the time that you take to complete each job has been increasing your work and has not been up to your old standards. Because you have been such an outstanding mechanic in the past, I felt sure you would want to know that I'm not happy with the situation and perhaps jointly we could find some way to correct the problem. The way that they handle that is, I mean, it's way different than I think what would typically happen in a specific situation. But when you call out, he says, if you want to excel in the difficult leadership role of changing the attitude of others, you have to give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. So even just going back and reminding them like, hey, you're an extremely powerful leader. You're extremely powerful at this. And we do this all the time in life coaching, right? Some people like feel like they're falling off track or when it comes to their health or their business or whatever. And they fail to realize that they were crushing it before, right? They were doing incredible. They were awesome. And because it's like something that's like not fresh in their mind, they forget about that, right? So being able to go back and to remind yourself, yes, of course you can remind other people, but also remind yourself about the fine reputation that you have to live up to will get you chasing your heart instead of chasing away from your head. All right. Number 8, by the way, I do want to hear which one of these connects most to you, with you, in terms of like, what is something that you find that you actually do? And the second piece is, what is something that you feel like you need to lean into and really, really work on? And I'll talk about them all one more time so you guys can give me some ideas, but I do want to hear that at the end. All right, number 8 is make the fault seem easy to correct. Some examples. They said, tell your child, your spouse, or your employee that he or she, tell your child, your spouse, or your employee that he or she is stupid or dumb at certain things, has no gift for it, and is doing it all wrong, and you've destroyed almost every incentive to try to improve. But use the opposite technique. Be liberal with your encouragement. Make the things seem easy to do. Let the other person know that you have faith in their ability to do it, and that they have an undeveloped flair for it, and they will practice until the dawn comes in the window in order to excel. So instead of telling them what's broken, wrong, or missing, tell them like which part of that they can, or actually give them encouragement, but also like what are some things that are easy to do and which parts of it does it kind of like seem that was actually made for them. And this is kind of like obviously a great opportunity for them, but any way that you can sell it to make them see that they do have that potential living inside of them will get them to be open to changing it. That's why principle number 8 is use encouragement. Make the fault seem easy to correct. One of the things that I try and do, and I don't know if I'm really, really good at this or not, is whenever I write an email or when I'm talking to somebody about like something they're struggling with, whether it's time management, whether it's their business and social media, whether it's their leadership, whether it's their family connection. Number one is I make sure I call out to when I really sucked worse than I do now. And the second thing I like to remind them is like, I still make mistakes now. And it's just a part of like the human experience. It's a part of how the brain works. It's a part of how this is supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be teaching you valuable lessons. And if we didn't have any pain, we actually wouldn't have the opposite of that either, right? And so instead of that, like being able to see like, oh, this is something that a lot of people experience. And there are some different paths that we can take in our brain to really like help unlock that subconscious mind to be able to show up and take an entirely different set of actions. But it's also really not that hard. It's just that when we beat ourselves up or we shame or we guilt or we try to humiliate ourselves, it's more likely that we're not going to continue to be on that path. And that's why principle number 8, he says, use encouragement. Make the fault seem easy to correct. All right, chapter number 9. By the way, I know I already said this, but each chapter is like 2 pages long. All right, chapter number 9, making people glad to do what you want. He was having a conversation. He says, Brian was distinctly disappointed when he heard I was going to Europe as the peace emissary. So basically what happened is there was this person who, it was like his mission to go out and to make peace. I think it was between World War I or World War II. Oh, back in 1915. So in World War I. And he said that somebody that was below him on the chain of command ended up getting called forward, and they were gonna be the one who was gonna go out and gonna connect with the other countries to form peace. And so William Jennings Bryan was the Secretary of State, and he was a little bit upset that it wasn't him who got chosen. So here's what the person who got chosen communicated to him, because he also didn't want him to have a bad relationship with him. He said, Brian was distinctly disappointed when he heard I was to go to Europe as the peace emissary. So Colonel House records in his diary, he said he had planned to do this himself. He said, I replied that the president thought it would be unwise for anyone to do this officially, and that his going, so Brian's going, would attract a great deal of attention and people would wonder why he was there. He said, you see that intimation? He says, House practically told Brian that he was too important for the job, and Brian was satisfied. They said the effective leader should follow the following guidelines when it is necessary to change attitudes or behaviors. Be sincere. Do not promise anything that you cannot deliver. Forget about the benefits to yourself and concentrate on the benefits of the other person. Know exactly what it is you want the other person to do. Number 3, be empathetic. Ask yourself, what does the other person really wants? In this situation, Brian wanted to be the person to actually go there, right? And so being able to communicate that was critical. Number 4, consider the benefits that the person will receive from doing what you suggest. So if you're like, I really want him to see the benefits of him not going and him staying back, you got to think about like, how can I frame it in a way that will get him to see that this actually benefits him staying back here? And then he says, match those benefits to the other person's wants. Like, what does Brian, want in this specific situation? He wanted to feel important, right? And really being able to see like, oh, okay, he wants to feel important. So how can I tie the fact that he's going to stay back to being important? And he did a great job of doing that. And then they say, when you make your request, put in a form that will convey to the other person the idea that he personally will benefit. So instead of making it out to be like, you're going to miss this, lead with like what it is specifically they're going to be able to benefit with. And this principle, in that breakdown that I just did, is to make the other person happy about doing the things you suggest That's what you have to do. So be sincere, like be honest. Don't fake it, right? Know exactly what the other person, know exactly what it is that you want, right? Be empathetic, like actually not just move over the tough or difficult stuff. Consider the benefits the other person will get. Then match those benefits to what the other person wants. And then when you make your request, make sure that you make it about the benefits that you're kind of talking about. And that's principle number 9, which is make the other person happy about doing the things you suggest. By the way, if you guys haven't read this book, I know some of you guys do come here and you're listening to it on audio, or you're just coming here to listen to this. This is a lot. This is a lot, like in these very short, I mean, it's like very short number of pages at the end, and all of that was inside of it. And I really feel like it's a good blueprint where if you're struggling with something, whether it's that, or whether it's, let me go back to the first part here. I mean, there's so many different things. Fundamental techniques of handling people, 6 ways to make people like you, how to win people to your way of thinking, and then of course, how to change people without giving offense or arousing resentment. Like, this is powerful stuff. And yes, it might need a few different tweaks based off of the digital world that we're in, but all of this stuff is so super powerful. Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna read these one more time, super quick, the principles 1 through 9. And I wanna hear 2 things. Number 1 is, what is a principle that you want to acknowledge and appreciate yourself for? Because you're like, I actually lean into this. This is one that I use, and we want to appreciate you, and we want you to be proud of you using that thing. And I know every single one of you guys is using some of these to an extent. I want you to really call out to it. The second piece I want you to think about as I read these is, which one do you feel like you have the greatest opportunity to lean into to create like even more success when it comes to winning people to your way of thinking, or getting people to or how to best change people without giving them offense, okay? All right, so in a nutshell, be a leader. A leader's job often includes changing your people's attitudes and behaviors, and some suggestions to accomplish this are, principle number 1 is begin with praise and honest appreciation. So begin with praise and honest appreciation. I think that is something that I do. I try to do, not all the time, but I would say principle number 1 for me is what I'm proud of myself for doing. Principle number 2, call attention to people's mistakes indirectly. So call attention to people's mistakes indirectly. That's principle number 2. Principle number 3, talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person. So talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person. Principle number 4, ask questions instead of giving direct orders. Ask questions instead of giving direct orders. Principle number 5, let the other person save face. Let the other person save face. Principle number 6, praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise. Principle number 7, give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. That, I think, is going to be the one for me to focus on. Giving the other person a fine reputation to live up to. Principle 8, use encouragement. Make the fault seem easy to correct. So principle 8 is use encouragement, make the fault seem easy to correct. And then principle 9, make the other person happy about doing the things that you suggest. So making the other person happy about doing the things you suggest. That one's a little bit more in depth because he has like a 6-step process in here, but it's making the other person happy about doing the things you suggest. So I want to hear, what is one of these principles that you feel that you need to acknowledge and appreciate yourself about? And I want to see it in the chat here. You can just put a number. And also the second number, I want you to think about like, which one do you have the greatest opportunity to really connect with people by leaning into it? Julie says, I'm so glad we reviewed this book. It has previously piqued my interest, but never picked it up. Timeless classic indeed. Thank you. 100%, Julie. 100%. Honestly, when I heard people talk about this book, it had been recommended for like 2 times in a row. I was like, is this one of those books where it's not going to be so helpful because it's like it has been written for so long ago? But I am also super glad that people kind of like pushed us all to be able to read this book. By the way, the next one, The Power of One More, equally as powerful, and it's one of those ones that you have to read slower, which is what I did in this book. Like, if you look at it, it's actually not that big, but if you can't tell, literally from today, we have 9 different ways, and any single one of these can change your life forever. It's kind of crazy like that. So that being said, what are your What do you want to acknowledge and appreciate yourself? And what is something you want to work on? For me, I'm going to acknowledge and appreciate myself for beginning with praise and honest appreciation. That's something I try to do all the time. And then one I'm going to work on is number 7, which is give the other person a fine reputation to live up to. Okay, guys. Wow. We blasted through that part of the book. If this is your first time being and watching this, we have 3 other live streams where we dove into the other rest and parts of the book. Definitely hit them up again. Like I said, we are not going to meet for the rest of October. We're going to meet starting in January, but I still want you to jump into the power of one more starting next week at least, if not if you're going to start in this week. But one of the things we're going to be doing is we're going to be using the app to share some of the takeaways and stuff that we're going. Take a picture of the page that you're reading, share it inside the app. I'm going to be doing that starting next week. So that way we can stay up to date on everything that we've got going on. And then when we start in January, why do I keep saying January? When I start in November, I'm definitely going to go through the entire book. It might take us a little bit longer to do this. I'm still going to be doing the live streams because people get a lot of power from these. Some people just watch these and don't even read the books. So I'm going to go through that, but don't rush through this book because it's one of those books that is truly a game changer. The Power of One More is just going to have you inspired, taking massive action, not only when it comes to your business and leadership and the impact that you're making, but also when it comes to not beating yourself up in the process. So guys, thank you for making it here to the end of another book. Super pumped to jump into our next book. I appreciate you guys so much. I look forward to seeing you guys on the Saturday workshops as we go. And until then, you guys keep crushing it. Keep leading from the front. Thank you for always being willing to lean in and be the leader that the world needs now more than ever. You guys have an incredible week and weekend, and I'll see you guys real soon. All right, bye, everybody.